Hi there folks. I recently posted a video showing these Dominion brand slugs in action, fired them out of 3 different shotgun barrels, and I'm going to do kind of a benchtop review now. I'm doing things a little bit backwards to the way I normally do it, but anyway, these are Russian manufactured slugs imported into Canada by Canada Ammo using their Dominion brand of trademark, kind of harkening back to the old Dominion shells, which were actually made in Canada, but Canada Ammo doesn't make anything. They basically just import things. Anyway, these are 25 shells to the box, 2 3/4 inch 12 gauge round ball slugs, and they're made in Russia. So there is some information on the side of the box. We've got the mass of the slug in grams, at least the nominal one, the weight of the powder charge in grams, the powder type, Urbis 24M, not a powder we've heard of around here. Start velocity in meters per second, and they've got a almost like a best before date, I think, on them. And there's the company that imports them, Discotech Industries, better known as Canada Ammo. And so you've got some proof marks on here from Russia, and that's the European sort of proof house or standards institute. And we've got the usual stuff on the box in French on this side and in English over here. So a little bit of Cyrillic on the bottom there. Can't read that, but I'm sure some of you viewers can do that. Looks like they've got some storage temperature recommendations there. Anyway, nothing terribly exciting about the box, just a cheap lightweight box. And the individual shells are in these see-through plastic hulls with a very pronounced roll crimp. You can see how far in the crimp is pushed. You can see the round ball poking out there. And we've got a one-piece plastic wad, a steel hull, a steel rim with a brass plating on it, and a standard 209 size primer. I think this is a Cheddite hull, if I'm not mistaken. It's either a Cheddite or a Fiocchi, one or the other. The Russians probably purchased those as a component and then load them themselves. So we'll have a look at what's inside, and this is the wad that they use. It's a double-ended wad. It could be loaded in either direction. This type of wad is usually used for sort of short-range, almost spreader loads, because a lot of the shot, if you use this with a standard charge of shot, a lot of the shot is in contact with the bore, and it tends to open your patterns up a little bit. So this is a wad that looks like one of those European brush or spreader type wads. And that wad is, let's see, I weighed it out, I think it was 43 grains for the wad by itself. The powder charge is this stuff here, and it's a very light gray, kind of a short, fine-grained, extruded type of powder. Well, it didn't say in the box what the powder type was, so not one that that I'm familiar with here, but most likely a Russian-produced powder. And last but not least, we have got the actual projectile itself. And this appears to be a cold rolled lead ball. There's no casting marks on it that I can see. And essentially this kind of projectile is formed by being extruded out in chunks and then rolled between 2 large plates until it is round, or round-ish anyway. And the big issue with this particular projectile, it looks, you know, reasonably round, but it's quite small. And it kind of depends on where you measure it, because it's not absolutely round. This kind of thing is never perfectly round, being rolled the way it is. But if you measure it in a few spots, you'll come out with about 66 caliber, as you can see on there. It'll vary a little bit depending upon where you hit it. It might be a little bit less, and it may be a bit more in some other spots. But nominally, we can call it .660 for the size, and that's pretty small for shooting out of a 12 gauge. As you can see, the round ball sits in this cup and it just barely, I don't think it actually does bottom out on the base of this wad unless you push on it. So it's it just kind of sits there, and this is a pretty easy fit through any barrel, and in fact would go through pretty much any choke without too much issue. And that's probably why they load them so small, because somebody would fire these out of an extra full choke, you know, especially of an old gun that's got a thin section at the barrel, and you might crack a really thin old barrel. Modern barrels are reasonably robust, although some screw-in chokes are a little bit fragile. So that's probably why they keep the projectile size so small. Let's see, I did weigh out the projectile. Let's see, and it came out to 398.5 grains. So just by way of reference, a 7/8 of an ounce is 383 grains, and 1 ounce is 437 grains. So it's closer to 7/8 of an ounce if you're going to use imperial measurements than it is to 1 ounce. So that's a pretty light projectile for a 12 gauge. And the velocities that I was getting with these were pretty low as well. In fact, they're more like a light 7/8 ounce low recoil target shell. If you were to equate them to a shot shell, they would be a very light shot shell in 12 gauge. So they certainly live up to their name as being, you know, low recoil, as they say here. In fact, they're so low powered that they would not cycle my Remington 1100, and I've seen a few other videos on YouTube of people shooting these, and they weren't having any better luck. One guy was trying them out of a Benelli, you know, the Benelli inertia operated shotgun, and it wouldn't run that either. So quite light, basically not usable in an auto as a, you know, as a repeater. You have to hand cycle them out of an auto. One thing I didn't have a look at yet was the hull itself when it's kind of opened up from its original unfired state. You can see where I cut a chunk out of this one to get the contents out, and you can see that really large portion of the hull which has been rolled over. And these are a tube type hull. They've got a what appears to be a separate base wad in them, and a 209 style primer. So that's just about the most common type of hull in the world today. I kind of like the see-through hull. It's kind of nice to be able to look in and see what's inside. Quite a difference in the you know, the unfired versus the fired length. These are very short. If you look at, here's an old Imperial polycore slug, and it's a roll crimp slug. And look at how long the Imperial is. That's a standard length of shell, and of course shotgun shells are measured in their fired length, not in their unfired length. So when these are excuse me, fired, like this one is here, and here's a Federal Top Gun hull. You can see the length of that. You can see the length of the Dominion ball one. They're the same length when they're fired. So these are nominally 2 3/4 of an inch. Actually, they're more like 2.7, but they give you a little bit of room to play with. But these are standard length when they're fired, but before they're fired, because of this extreme roll crimp, they are quite short. I tried them in my 870 with the magazine extension on it, and it is supposed to be a 7-shot extension, one in the chamber. With these short things, you can actually get an extra shell in the 870 that it will take 1 extra shell, because of course there's a little bit of play with the normal setup, and this will allow, these short shells will allow for the extra shell. So I guess that's some minor advantage to these, although I don't think it makes up for the rather dismal performance of them. So once again, there's the fired hull. You can see the rather extreme roll crimp has sort of taken its whole toll on the hull. It's tapered down quite a bit. You can see how tapered down it is there. And I tried resizing a couple of these. Here's one that I ran through my mech, and the mech kind of comes down and tries to open the hull back up so that you can, you know, load your next wad in, and you can see that the hull split a bit there. So if you were going to use these again, you'd probably want to heat the ends of the hulls up a bit before you tried to reload them, just to kind of get the plastic softened up enough that you could expand it a bit with your machine to keep that splitting from going on. I don't know if I'll bother using these or not. I don't know. I'll probably hang on to them for a while. They might come in handy for something or another, but more of a novelty item, I guess, at this stage of the game. Oh, and they do, by the way, take a standard U.S. size 209 primer. I believe the old European type primer is kind of falling out of favor, and they're loading the standard US 209 style of primer nowadays. It's probably Cheddite primer, because they seem to be one of the more common and low-cost primers in the world. Anyway, let's see. I can't think of really anything else to say about these other than they were a little bit, well, they were a lot disappointing, I guess. I think I already showed these wads on my shooting review and how mangled the wads are, so the wads really aren't up to the task of dealing with that round ball. You know, looks like the wad blew right, or the round ball blew right through the wad, and the wads were scattered in a really weird pattern. I found some, 40 yards away, and then even found one right at the 100-yard mark, and I was shooting at the target, was at 50 yards, and it carried past the 50 yards right to the backstop. So I'm assuming that some of these wads maybe are sticking to the round ball a little bit and disturbing their flight, or anyway. Altogether, an interesting idea. Had they loaded them with a bigger round ball and perhaps a better wad, they might have been a more satisfactory slug. But anyway, you never know till you try these things, and that's the only reason I bought these, was just to give them a try. You just never know till you try for yourself. And I think I'll be sticking with my homebrewed stuff. But anyway, thanks for watching, guys, and we'll talk to you later.